I think there's a common misconception, and I had it originally. I'm very guilty of this. I'm like, oh, esports, those aren't athletes, right? When people say they're not athletes, why are they wrong?
So I'm not going to start from the premise they are wrong, right? Like, I think that whether or not someone is an athlete or whether or not something is a sport is an arbitrary line drawing exercise that reasonable humans can disagree about, right? Like, whether or not League of Legends is a sport is on some level irrelevant, right? Like it's just about how many people care about it. And you're right, does it become part of the cultural zeitgeist, right? So do we care if some third party decides on the definition of sport and that we don't fall into it? Does that matter? Or is this really just about how popular it is, how many people want to watch the thing, engage with the thing, and call it a day, right? There are tons of sport. Like, does anyone argue about whether track is a sport? Outside of the Olympics every 4 years, does anyone give a shit about track?
Good point. Welcome back to Yang Speaks, folks. This is Zach Grauman, your co-host. Excited to be with you all, and really excited because today is Thursday, and you know what that means. We're focused on the future of our special limited series. And today's topic is the future of eSports, competitive gaming, folks. So I saw this YouTube video of a guy saying that more people watched the League of Legends World Championship than watched the college football playoff. And that was in 2016. And that blew my mind. I said, I got to get this guy on the podcast. We did. His name is Bryce Blum, founder of Theorycraft. And he basically advises all of the players in the esports world, from contract negotiations to sponsorships on the corporate level. He has knowledge about the inner workings and the high level picture of where this industry of competitive gaming and esports is going. It is mind blowing. Holy crap. Talk about a world that doesn't get enough attention. So I asked him a whole bunch of questions at what is this? Where is it going? Is this really a sport? Does that matter? And he put me in my place a number of times. I learned a ton. Carly Riley joins, who's a recurring co-host for us as our finance director on the presidential campaign. Always love Carly's perspective. The title of this episode is the next is the next LeBron James a video gamer, which I'm being a little facetious. But the concept is that is someone as iconic as LeBron James is the next person who's going to be that iconic, potentially a video gamer. And guys, by the numbers, that is not as far-fetched as it sounds. So tune in, listen up, the future of esports on Yang Speaks. All right, folks, welcome to your next episode of Yang Speaks, the future of, and we are talking about the future of sports, specifically esports, and I'm so freaking excited. We have someone who's, I think, so unique at this point in, let's call it, the existence and future of a certain industry, and that is esports. So Bryce Blum has joined us today, and Bryce is the founder of a firm called Theorycraft, but what he does is advises, I'm going to say, anyone and everything on esports, competitive electronic sports and gaming. And this industry is blowing up, essentially already has blown up, yet no one is truly talking about it enough given the scale it's got. So we've got Bryce here, and we're also joined by the one and only Carly Riley. Always love your perspective. So both of you, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Always love being here.
Me too. I have always loved being here.
Tell us, a simple question. What is an esport? What is esports? How do you define it?
I usually say esports is the umbrella term that refers to professional competitive video gaming. Video games are to esports what basketball is to the NBA, right? So as you can imagine, there are far more games and gamers than qualify as esports, much like there are far more people who play some form of sport than are doing it at the 0.001% highest professional level. Put a different way, esports are the very bottom of the gaming funnel.
It's not just like people playing Madden online, right? These are some of them are like invented worlds, right? Tell me how's it work?
Yeah, there are esports, ecosystems built around the sports simulation games, FIFA being the biggest, but Madden and NBA 2K have very large competitive scenes as well. None of them are in the top 5 most popular esports, right? The biggest esports in the world are games that you may or may not have heard of, right? League of Legends, the most popular video game on the planet, the most popular esport on the planet, is and has been, for close to a decade now, is kind of the marquee esport. But then you have other titles that you might be familiar with. Counter-Strike, which has been around in some form for the last 20 years, right, as we've gone through the different iterations of the game. Dota, Call of Duty, Fortnite, Overwatch, right? These are the big titles when you're thinking about esports.
Why do you think that is? Like, why do you think those games really capture people at the scale that they do, more so than like these sports games or, Madden and FIFA and those?
There are a bunch of reasons, right? There's no one specific reason why sports simulation esports are less popular, but a few of them are: one, sports simulation games tend to be most popular on console. PC gaming, right, is playing on your computer at home. Console gaming is Xbox, PlayStation. And there are more people who have played a game of League of Legends on planet Earth than currently own an Xbox or PlayStation. So the addressable market for a console game is smaller than it is for a PC game, and these games historically have all been played on console. There's also elements of this that are, first, the core sports simulation games are 1v1 games, at least historically. There's some innovation happening around that right now, but historically you played Madden, me against you, and that means that a whole bunch of what is happening in the game is AI, right? You're not controlling it. You're the quarterback who throws the ball, but whether or not the receiver catches the ball, whether or not a defender intercepts it, generally speaking, is outside of the control of the player. And so it's a little bit less compelling in that way. And then I also just think, there is a subset of people who play sports-based video games, and they tend to be fans of the sport themselves. And so it's just a smaller market than if you're looking at all of the people who play games. I mean, there are 3 billion gamers in the world, right? And so
3 billion.
Yeah, and so when you find the best of the best competitive game, you're not going to have 3 billion people playing League of Legends, but at its peak, it's over 100 million monthly active users for League of Legends, right? And so there's just so many more potential players of those games out there than there are for the sports simulation games, where you're really mostly interested in it if you're also interested in the sport itself.
Carly, did you grow up playing video games?
No. And it's actually, this is a question that I'm sure gamers will hate me for. And I know it, like, people like to push back on it. So I want to hear the pushback. I wasn't allowed to play a lot of these games because my parents were opposed to the violence in the games. And my mom was very worried about it, making people more violent or aggressive or angry. Do you hear that, Bryce? And what do you sort of say to that?
Yeah, I hear it all the time. I hear it so often that about a year ago in I can't remember where, there was a mass shooting, and there was some connection that the person played Call of Duty, and it wasn't in the US. I think it was in Germany or something, and politicians were talking about, this is a gaming related thing. And so I was like, I'm just going to dispel this myth. So I compiled everything I had read over the course of my life about this. And spoiler alert, there is absolutely nothing that connects mass shootings or violence to video gaming. There are far more and better studies on the side that there is absolutely no causal link whatsoever than there are on a limited basis. There is some proof that certain types of video games have led to increased aggression, for example, right? But for what it's worth, Carly, I grew up in the same household. I wasn't allowed to play games growing up. My mom thought that it was less about violence and more that they rotted my brain. Mm-hmm. And turns out that neither of these things are true, actually, right? There's a ton of good research out there. Not every video game, right? If you're playing, 10 straight hours of Grand Theft Auto, that's probably not the most enriching thing. But the esports games we're talking about, right? League of Legends and Counter-Strike, these are deeply complicated and cerebral games that require an enormous amount of team cohesion, teamwork, overcoming of adversity, creative problem solving, etc. And so there's actually a growing body of research that these types of games are incredibly enriching. That they improve performance, not just in STEM related, but across the board in school. So there's a lot of, and there's a great TED Talk on this that Jane McGonigal did about gamers saving the world that's worth watching. But yeah, I mean, I grew up in that same household, and turns out that my mom, lied to me, or I guess the more charitable interpretation is she wasn't reading the research, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
When I was in college, I used to take this super food green smoothie. I used to buy one every day, and they were great. And then I moved to Manhattan, can't afford them. It's like 50 times the price. So how I've substituted that out is with Athletic Greens. And I've been talking about them for a while, and they're awesome. It's this powder. You put it in water, put it in whatever you want. And you get, with one scoop, minerals and whole food source ingredients, including a multivitamin, multi-mineral, probiotic, green superfood blend, and more. And they all essentially work together to fill the nutritional gaps in your diet, increase your energy and focus, and aid with digestion and support a healthy immune system, which is important during COVID. And you don't have to take lots of other supplements. So right now, Athletic Greens is doubling down on supporting your immune system, and they're offering our audience a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. So if you visit our link today, you'll basically never have to buy vitamin D again. So visit athleticgreens.com/yang and join health experts, athletes, and health conscious go-getters around the world who make a daily commitment to health every single day. Again, athleticgreens.com/yang. Get your free supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs today. League of Legends seems to be a different beast. So what is that? I know nothing besides some of the quick research I did. So let's assume I know nothing. How's it work?
You wouldn't believe how many times I've gotten this question, and I'm still pretty bad at answering it.
It's so complicated.
Yeah, I mean, League of Legends, it's kind of like if someone asks you to explain football, right? Like, where do you start, right? Like, okay, so there's, a bunch of people on the field. You alternate between offense and defense. You can throw the ball. You can also hand it to people. There's a line of scrimmage, which is like a line where no one can cross it until the ball is hiked. Oh, and hiking the ball is when a center is a guy on the line. Oh, wait, what is the offensive line, right? Like, it's actually amazing. And we haven't even gotten to anything, right? I haven't explained anything about what football is. It's kind of the same thing. I mean, League of Legends is played 5-on-5. There are elements of the game that are very individual. You start in what are called lanes for most of the players. So there are 3 lanes, 2 lanes where people participate individually, 1 where it's a pair. And then there's a kind of a neutral area in the middle of the map called the jungle. And so everyone has a jungler that kind of roams around the map and makes plays throughout. The game starts off in a more kind of siloed way. And as the game progresses, you move more towards like playing as a 5-man unit and kind of 5-man against 5-man, but there are also strategies that involve kind of separating the map, and one team really wants a 5-man fight and the other team is like, we don't want to give you that. We'll put one person top, one person bot, and we'll just constantly disengage and put pressure on the map elsewhere. The ultimate goal of a game of League of Legends is to destroy the other side's base, their nexus, and in order to do that, you need to kill towers along the way that are protecting that base. But how you get there and what a game of League of Legends looks like varies wildly. The important thing, I think, for our purposes is it's a 5v5 game where it requires an incredible amount of strategy based on the characters that you pick and how the game flow works. And playing from behind is very different from playing from ahead. Playing from ahead with this set of champions is different than playing with that set of champions, but it's every bit as complex as what's happening on the field of football. It's just in the same way that a football fan can watch and appreciate the nuances between zone and man-to-man defense and be like, oh my God, Aaron Rodgers just looked off the safety in order to create the space for the out route or whatever, right? A League of Legends fan is doing the same thing when they're watching it. It's just, if you don't know the game, you don't know the game. When you get to the higher stakes tournaments, you play series, usually best of 5s. And I always analogize it to like a tennis match where each game is a set of tennis and you're trying to be the first to, get to 3 sets.
So I was having this conversation a couple months ago with some friends about why we haven't had any new sports invented, right? Ignorant of eSports, right? We were like, there hasn't been, a lot of these sports, football, hockey, soccer, baseball, basketball, like they've been around for hundreds of years, right? And human beings evolve different ways. Like we're creative enough to create new sports. And we were talking about the barriers to entry for those sports, these traditional sports, are pretty high, right? Where you usually, in order to become a competitive, let's call it, become an NBA player, become the pinnacle of your game, you need a ton of parental support. You need to start at an early age. You need to find other kids who have the same parental support and start at an early age. And basically, when you're young, you are learning the same 100-year-old, 200-year-old rules of how the game is played. And there's some beauty to that, for sure. But that also prevents some of the best athletes in the world from playing newer games, right? They're mastering some of these old games in a different way. And with esports, let's call it League of Legends, like if someone creates a new game, you probably have hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of new video games coming out. And if people can find it online, if it's good, other people join it. And if it's really good, other people start really mastering the craft. And the barrier to create a completely new sport has now been essentially eliminated or vastly lowered. Would you agree with that? Is that one of the reasons why some like this thing is so complex, way more complex than football? Some of the like hand-eye coordination is extraordinarily elite. I know you showed me a video of someone like firing off with a controller, like rapid speed, incredible hand-eye coordination in order to do, to execute at these levels. Like, agree with that statement? I don't know your thoughts on like how this is kind of morphed into something new.
Yeah, I sort of agree, sort of disagree. So first of all, there are definitely newer sports. I mean, no one was playing frisbee golf 20 years ago, right? There are certain sports like cross country that have been around for thousands of years, right? And then other sports that have been around for hundreds of years or 100 years, right? It's not like the NBA is 300 years old, right? But point taken, right? Like the arc of traditional stick and ball sports tends to be a much kind of longer story than a typical video game. And that's absolutely the case. I mean, if you look at the history of video games, it's one where we're constantly pushing the bounds of what's possible from a technological perspective. And so there's a lot of innovation happening and a lot of, therefore, new and better games that are coming out. But the esports overlay to this is really interesting because if I mentioned the most popular esports being League of Legends and Counter-Strike. Well, League of Legends is a decade old and still the most popular game. There have been hundreds of games, thousands of games, millions of games that have come out in this decade, right? Some of them have become incredibly popular, right? Like, you've probably all heard of Ninja and Fortnite, right? Or if you haven't, a lot of your audience has. Will League of Legends still be the most popular esport in 30 years? I don't know, but it's possible, right? And that's Riot Games' bet, by the way. Riot Games' bet is that they're creating a generational esport.
And Riot Games is the developer of League of Legends?
Exactly. And their hope is that in 30 years, when we're listing the biggest sports in the world, we're going to say soccer and we're going to say League of Legends, right? And I don't know if Riot is going to win, right? The odds are against them. It's really hard to stay that popular for that long. But I am 100% sure that whatever the most popular esport is in 2050, it will be that popular, that we will be saying a video game and soccer, because the global market penetration of gaming is already to that extent. And when you compare that to the other big stick and ball sports, basketball, football, baseball, whatever, they are phenomenon that exist in some subsection of the globe, right? And depending on the sport, there's different answer. Baseball is very popular in the US, also in South America and certain parts of Asia. Football is mostly just popular in the US, but certain parts of Europe. Basketball is very popular in certain areas of Asia, very popular in Europe, very popular in some other regions, right? But the kind of the global potential of being the most popular competitive video game is just higher than it is for basically any sport that's not soccer.
Is accessibility a part of why it's so big, though? And I think more so than what you're saying, Zach, what strikes me is like there's like physical limitations to becoming a pro athlete. Like, I could never be a professional basketball player just by virtue of my like stature, like it was just never happening for me. But that's not true. It's like more accessible in some ways. These games are, or at least I would think of them that way. Is that a factor in this?
The ceiling for being the upper echelon of a top tier esport is every bit the ceiling that exists for traditional sports, right? To Zach's like pipeline, the pipeline doesn't really exist yet because we haven't had a generation of, we haven't had the second generation of esports fans. It's starting to happen, right? Like, I'm having my first kid in May, and
hey,
I
will.
Thank you. I'm very excited, and I will watch Seahawks games with her, but I will also watch Team Liquid versus Cloud9. Right. And that'll just be part of our life. And she will grow up in a world in which she is indoctrinated not just into her dad's sports fandom, but into her esports fandom. Right. And when you think about how we get our sports fandom, by the way, it's exactly where you would think we would come from. Over 98% of sports fandom comes from one of two places. You get it generationally from your parents, or you get it from your geography, right? And we haven't created those dynamics in esports yet, but we will. And to return to your core question, Carly, right? This pipeline is going to exist, and in order to be a top esports, player, athlete, whatever term you want to use, it's every bit as hard as it will be to get into the NBA. And it's not size, strength, speed, agility that's going to be the separating criteria, but it's going to be mechanical skill, right? And your ability to control your, whatever, your controller, your mouse, your keyboard, as well as an enormous amount of real-time, complex strategic decision-making. When you're talking about a group of League of Legends players, we commend Aaron Rodgers for his football IQ, or Tom Brady, right? And there are tons of players in all the different sports. LeBron James is another one we talk about all the time, where it's like his basketball IQ is off the charts. You don't need an off the charts basketball IQ to play in the NBA, though. You can just be a very good basketball player. You need an off the charts game IQ for all of these games. You cannot be an elite level Counter-Strike player or Fortnite player or Rocket League player or League of Legends player without an off the charts IQ for the game. And so we're testing for different things, but we're very much sorting for the 0.0001% of capability of humanity.
This episode of Yang Speaks is brought to you by Parachute, and I cannot shut up about Parachute. Wouldn't shut up about it so much that my sister-in-law just got, she's moving into a new house, and she just bought a bunch of things on Parachute's website, and they're awesome. I have their sheets. I have their towels. I don't know how else to explain it. It's like sleeping on a freaking cloud. It's so fluffy and lovely. I get out of the shower, I wrap myself in the bathrobe situation. Ugh, it's amazing, guys. Seriously, Parachute is unbelievable. They believe in making home your happy place. And trust me when I say this, it actually does make it a bit of a happy place. It is worth every penny. So visit parachutehome.com/yang for free shipping and returns on Parachute's very comfortable, premium quality home essentials. You will not regret it. It's amazing. The quality cannot be beat. You'll just feel like you're wrapped in joy all the time. It's pretty awesome. Parachutehome.com/yang. So how I found you, Bryce, was talking. I have a friend that works in the event, a lot of parts of eSports, and he sent me this video of you. The point I remember vividly, and this was in 2016, we made this video, where you showed a bar graph on the number of people who watched the NCAA college football playoff championship. And I think that was 20 some odd million. And then you showed the number of people who watched the League of Legends championship. And it dwarfed it, doubled it. It was in 40 million plus or so. And that was 5 years ago. Talk to me how big we're talking here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's a good moment for me to do a little bit of a mea culpa and be realistic about some mistakes I made early on in my career, where putting that you had that reaction for a reason, right? I wanted you to have that reaction, right? I wanted you to think, wow, are esports bigger than the traditional sports? But there's a reality to the way in which esports viewership is measured, particularly at that time, where it was measured in total. And I talked about this during the presentation, I believe, right? I talked about, what I used to say is it's an apples to oranges comparison. You're comparing total uniques to Nielsen ratings. What it actually is an apples to lug wrenches comparison, right? You're comparing on Nielsen ratings a weighted average of people who are watching a broadcast at any given point in time, controlling for number of human beings that watch a TV on average. And in total uniques, you're comparing the number of devices that have watched at least a second of a broadcast, right? And so it's pretty misleading, and it led to misleading headlines like the League of Legends World Championships is bigger than the NBA Finals. That's a headline that was run everywhere from ESPN to CNBC because no one unpacked the data. And I would unpack the data during my presentation and I would make these points, but I should never have used the graph in the first place.
You guys are building your brand, though. You're building your sport.
And it is so much bigger than I think people realize, which is fundamentally the point.
Yeah, absolutely. But the nice thing is, right, we've evolved. We've both grown a lot in the last 5 years, and we've evolved in how we're showing the data. So, for example, the League of Legends World Championships last year had over 100 million unique viewers, total unique viewers. But they also measured what is a new digital measurement statistic called average minute audience. And it's not one-to-one with Nielsen, but it's much closer. And in many ways, average minute audience is actually a better statistic because it's more clear what we're actually saying. We're saying at an average minute of this world championship, this is how many people were watching, right? And it's valuable. And last year, there were 22 million people in the AMA of the League of Legends World Championship. So, it wasn't that big 5 years ago. I don't actually have that number from 5 years ago, right? But it was probably in the ballpark of 3 to 5 million AMA at the time in 2016. So we've grown a tremendous amount. And now we actually are in a world where we can say, hey, an AMA of 22 million, that actually is bigger than, for example, the World Series viewership, right? So we actually are in a place where we can do the direct comparison and stand on our own 2 feet. The macro point I always make when we talk about viewership is, listen, we're in the top half of the second inning of this thing.
What was really interesting to me about that video was the visuals you showed, showing what I think it was League of Legends, what the League of Legends World Final Championship looked like. I think it was maybe 2011, or I don't remember exactly the first year. And it's kind of scrawny, and it's some teenagers, it looks like, in a conference room or whatever. And then it shows what in 2016 that League of Legends final looked like, and it's stadium level, it's huge. That was the visual that really stuck with me, and that speaks to those growth trends. So I think that's worth talking about, just how much it's grown sort of 2016 to now, but sort of what you foresee in that.
Yeah, so so the setup is that it's, if you were there, it would feel like traditional sports in every way, except for you would have no idea what's happening on your screen, right? You're walking around a stadium, you're seeing, a bunch of fans wearing the merchandise, the jerseys of the famous, the favorite team, their favorite player. There's color and play-by-play commentary. They're kicking to an analyst desk in between games, which is the equivalent of, a halftime show, right? You're going to the NBA on TNT desk or what have you, the equivalent for every sport. You're seeing sponsor logo integrations on the screen, and there's giveaways or live event activations. It really is traditional sports in every way. And to Carly's point, we've evolved a lot. I mean, as good as that World Championship was in 2016, 3 years later, the League of Legends World Championship won a sports Emmy, right? I mean, the level of production around this stuff, it's mind blowing, right? It is every bit going to a tier 1A sporting event. I've been to NBA Finals games, I've been to a Super Bowl, I've been to all of this stuff. Really, the only thing that, for me, from a production level, is a tier above is the Super Bowl, which is the marquee live sports event on planet Earth, basically, every year from a production standpoint. But going to League of Legends World Championships is like going to the NBA Finals. I mean, the last time it was in the US, it was at the Staples Center, and Zed played the pre-show with a custom song that he did for the League of Legends World Championships, and they rose up these clear screens all the way up in the Staples Center, and they had 3D custom art visuals going all the way around it, and I got goosebumps. It was unbelievable visual spectacle in terms of what they are creating. So, I mean, we have, as the audience has grown, the, investment has grown, the production quality has grown, really all of this has improved dramatically, and as big of a jump as we made from 2011 to 2016, we're making a similar jump from 2016 to 2021.
I'm always fascinated by companies that are built with the digital world in mind, right? Where there's no brick and mortar. So everyone watching is watching online. That is so different than the Super Bowl, where most of the people watching are watching on not even cable TV, broadcast TV, right? Totally different immersive experience that, frankly, the monetization options and sponsorship options and interaction with the athletes are probably endless. All right, this episode of Yang Speaks is brought to you by The New Yorker. I don't know if you guys watched the HBO documentary on Alan V. Farrow. It's fascinating. But one of their best journalists at The New Yorker is Ronan Farrow, and he's a genius. The New Yorker is just one of the better places where you can get real deep dives into specific topics and stuff I've always been interested but haven't particularly spent time on reading. So I read 2 articles that I found fascinating. I found one about American Christianity and how it's shaped, frankly, and gone to places that I didn't think Christianity was going to. And it's really become very political in a weird way. And then that was called The Wasting of an Evangelical Mind. And then the other one I read was called Email is Making Us Miserable, which it is. So this type of stuff you get from The New Yorker, which is fascinating. So here's the deal. For a limited time, you can get 12 weeks of The New Yorker for just $6. That's a savings. You get 50% off. It's awesome. Plus, listeners of our show will receive an exclusive tote bag to carry around for free. So go to newyorker.com/yang. That's NEWYORKER.com/yang to get 12 weeks in New Yorker for $6 and a free tote bag. newyorker.com/yang. I want to talk about the athletes and this structure. We love watching our athletes succeed and fail on the field. Like if there's a human element. Have celebrities started to pop up? Like how does the athlete dynamic work in esports?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course there are celebrities, right? In the same way that when you follow a traditional sport, you fall in love with the best player, the most interesting player, or some combination thereof. You're doing the same thing in esports. And depending on what game you follow and what region you're watching, different people are going to be a household name for you. So, NBA fan, would freak out if LeBron James walked by them on the street and, someone who doesn't follow the NBA at all might be like, that's a unusually large and physically fit human being, but like maybe they don't know. Or LeBron James is probably a bad example here, right? Because he's reached a level of kind of mainstream penetration that everyone, but like, what about someone who's like a very famous basketball player, but who isn't quite at that level, right? I don't know who's,
Josh Allen. I'm a Buffalo Bills fan. I see Josh Allen. He's great.
Sure.
He's amazing, but he's young. He's not LeBron James. Maybe he will be a football someday.
Depending on what game you follow, you absolutely have your celebrity. They're, the top of the performance ladder, making 7-figure salaries and have hundreds of thousands of followers on social platforms. And, they're a big deal.
That's what I was gonna ask. They get paid 7 figures. Like what's the average and then what's the top end of what people are getting paid to do this?
Some of these numbers have been released for League of Legends specifically, so I can talk about them. I do a lot of these deals,
you negotiate
right? So,
a lot of these contracts.
Yeah, so I cannot comment on any of those, but I can tell you that the North American League of Legends League, which is the biggest North American league for the biggest esport in the world right now, releases these figures, and the average salary is somewhere around $350,000, and on the high end, they're in the 7 figures.
It seems to me that there's actually even a higher level of intimacy between the players and their fans in the esports world, because you have things like Twitch where some of these players have come up live streaming and talking directly to the fans. And so there's actually even more of a connection between the players and the athletes than you see in traditional sports. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely 100% right. And it's an area where traditional sports are over time going to model after esports instead of the other way around, because we are quite frankly better at this than stick and ball sports are. So,
sure.
To put it in perspective, right? I want to unpack Twitch, Carly, because I think very few people know what Twitch is that are outside of this world. Twitch is where we consume a lot of our content. YouTube is the other big place, right? Both live streaming Twitch and YouTube, VOD mostly just on YouTube. And what you're doing when you're watching that, right? Let's just break it down in a way people understand. LeBron James goes to play pickup basketball. He slaps a GoPro onto his chest while he's playing pickup basketball with a bunch of other NBA players. And so you're getting a behind the scenes glimpse at what he's like in a more casual setting, how he interacts with them. He's talking shit. He's, having a good time, bantering back and forth. He's also working on his game though. He's, practicing his lefty hook shot today. And so he's talking through everything from how he gets in the block, how he creates space for the shot, what he's doing with his footwork, how he's thinking about how the defense is approaching it, what he does if he gets double teamed, all of these things. And then where this analogy really breaks down is with Twitch chat. He's also got a live feed of everyone watching him that are memeing with him and asking him questions and commenting on things, and he's responding to them in real time. Right. And so that is happening every second of every day on Twitch. If you're completely uninitiated, if you have no idea what we're talking about right now, go to twitch.tv and click on a random stream and see what I'm talking about and understand that there are, to put Twitch in perspective, right, is the second most popular live streaming platform behind only Netflix in the US. Twitch's popularity is wild, right? I mean, they're doing over 10 billion hours watched annually. The average Twitch user goes back to the site for over 2 hours per session, and they have 16 million daily users on Twitch, right? So this is a hub, not just of gaming culture, but of some other subcultures as well. But gaming is the primary focal point of Twitch. And it is wild what we've been able to do in breaking down some of these barriers between the celebrity and the fan.
It strikes me as like part of this broader trend that we see in content and like the future of content, right? Like when I grew up, I watched like Disney Channel and it was highly produced and it was on TV and it was like very, managed. And it feels like where content is moving for Gen Z is much more like on YouTube, somebody vlogging, like there's a rawer quality to it where they want to feel more like they're connected to the person as opposed to something that's like highly produced. And it feels like Twitch and gaming is really like a part of that trend.
Yeah, absolutely. The democratization of content is everything. I mean, look at what we're able to do right now, right? I mean, it's relatively straightforward. The technology we're using, basically everyone has in their home, right? Or the overwhelming percentage of, Americans at least have in their home and available to them. And it's funny to see some of these things went out, right? Just to derive from your kind of how people think through broadcast quality and, level of production. Riot Games produced their version of SportsCenter, right? And poured millions of dollars and had access to every guest under the sun to create like the marquee League of Legends talk show. And a couple of influencers who literally just did this, they sat at home and they recorded themselves and they brought on guests and they just talked about things, zero production quality, blew them away from viewership because it was less polished. It was what we wanted to see. It was raw. It was real. They were calling it like it is. If a team was, doing terribly, they were like, this team sucks. And here's why they suck. Whereas when you're producing SportsCenter, you don't do that. You kind of have to
play the politics of it.
Yeah, right? And it's like, we don't want that. Like, we want to just have a real conversation about what this is. And so Twitch is absolutely part of this general movement of the democratization of content. And it's really cool.
I'm thinking right now, if I could listen to Josh Allen during his practices, talking about what he's thinking, how he's throwing a football. If you're a Tom Brady fan, or if you're a Tom Hanks fan, Leonardo DiCaprio, and he's talking about how he's approaching a scene and doing it seamlessly and casually and reacting to freaking comments as he's doing it, I would pay money for this. And I imagine people do.
Well, I think that's the other piece of this is the monetization element of Twitch that's different than traditional sports because you can pay right on Twitch, right? So if I'm gaming, somebody could kind of pay me directly as they're watching me. And that's where this also feels like there's all sorts of upside in the world of eSports, like almost like salaries that don't exist in traditional sports. Or are there rules around professional gamers getting money on Twitch?
No, they can, go and do your thing, right? There are some differences in how traditional sports versus esports are monetized on the sponsorship level, where for the most part, esports teams are inventory aggregators. So, it's very common for Team X to be sponsored by Nike and Player Y to be sponsored by Adidas in traditional sports. That's less common in esports. Part of the kind of package of what you're buying are some of those rights of publicity. And so the team and players are collectively promoting a group of sponsors, generically speaking. But stuff like Twitch is really separate and people monetize that independently. And they monetize, they get donations on Twitch. They have people subscribe for perks on the platform and for ad-free experiences, right? You can run ads on Twitch and the broadcaster collects a CPM on that. So the content is free. You don't need to be it's not like Netflix. You don't need to be a Netflix subscriber. It's not all behind a paywall. You can just go on twitch.tv right now and watch this stuff, but you might get served an ad and you might, have an opportunity to do other things to support the creator if you so choose.
Sports, at least historically, and I still think now, is so tied to culture. And it's not just the United States, although that's a big one. Football dominates here. There's a cultural zeitgeist that happens around our sport. And it hasn't happened with esports yet. And I feel like that's, to me, where that's where you get into mainstream, in my opinion. So I want to start with the athlete piece, because I think there's a common misconception. And I had it originally. I'm very guilty of this. I'm like, oh, esports, those aren't athletes, right? When people say they're not athletes, why are they wrong?
So I'm not going to start from the premise they are wrong, right? Like, I think that whether or not someone is an athlete or whether or not something is a sport is an arbitrary line drawing exercise that reasonable humans can disagree about, right? Like, whether or not League of Legends is a sport is on some level irrelevant, right? Like it's just about how many people care about it. And you're right, does it become part of the cultural zeitgeist, right? So for example, I'm a diehard sports fan. I have been for my entire life, right?
Yeah.
I watch, I'm college basketball, football, right? Like these are parts of my everyday being, right? And have been since I was born, basically. But I would rather watch a dozen different eSports than watch baseball, much to my dad's chagrin, right? Like he tried so hard to make me a baseball fan. Outside of the playoffs, it is just boring. Like I don't know how else to describe it. Like it is not compelling content to me. And it might be compelling content to someone else. And the reason why we have these debates, and there are people in my industry who get very up in arms about this debate, by the way, are esports sports? Are the players athletes? For me, it's just like you're letting people get under your skin for the wrong reasons, right? Like, do we care if some third party decides on the definition of sport and that we don't fall into it? Does that matter? Or is this really just about how popular it is, how many people want to watch the thing, engage with the thing, and call it a day, right? There are tons of sport. Like, does anyone argue about whether track is a sport? Outside of the Olympics every 4 years, does anyone give a shit about track?
Good point.
I used to have so much fun getting under people's skin in the inverse where I would say, okay, esports aren't a sport. What are sports? And they would tell me, oh, you need to be a certain level of athleticism to play. And they give me their definition. And I'd be like, great. By that definition, baseball is not a sport. And they'd say, what are you talking about? Of course, baseball is a sport. It's been a sport forever. And I'd say, well, wait a second. You told me that in order for it to be a sport, everyone who plays has to be an elite athlete.
I had an old boss I used to fight with that said, if you can eat nachos while you play it, it's not a sport. Which would make baseball, if you're a right fielder, generally not a sport.
Totally. And so it is very fun to kind of play around with people on this, but it's only because of like norms that if you tell them it's not a sport, it's less than, right? That's all that's really happening, right? If they would just reject the premise of the discussion and say, it doesn't really matter to me if you think baseball is a sport, I like it and I like watching it, we're fine, right? Like, I watched a bunch of poker content in my life, right? And it's people argued for years about whether or not poker is a sport. I don't care. It's entertaining. I watched a documentary last night about speed cubing. It is literally people who compete in Rubik's Cube competitions, and there are audiences for this. With the big they were showing the World Championships, and there's an auditorium filled with people watching people solve Rubik's Cubes as quickly as possible. And it was fascinating. And am I going to go to the Rubik's Cube World Championship? No, I probably won't. But there are people who want to. Yeah, exactly. Right? And so, chess is becoming really popular on Twitch. Is it a sport? No. Is it a video game? No. But like, it's entertaining. So why do we care? So anyway, so that's that conversation. But I do actually want to get back to the core point you were making, which is what goes into being an elite player of these games. And it is harder to visually grasp in the same way that when you watch, an elite athlete do their thing, and you see, Odell Beckham Jr. jump 4 feet in the air and catch a ball with one hand extended all the way out. And it's like, holy God. The fact that a human being can do that is wild. It's wild, right? And it's the same thing is happening in everything from Counter-Strike to League of Legends to Dota to Rocket League. It's just happening in a form that's a little bit harder to grasp because it's mechanical skill that is being expressed through a mouse, keyboard, or console. It is a thought process, the series of decisions that are getting made. There's one of the most famous League of Legends plays of all time is from the most famous League of Legends player of all time. His name is Faker. He's a Korean mid laner, and it was a mirror match. So they were both on the exact same champion, which doesn't happen very often for reasons that are not relevant to this discussion. And he so thoroughly outplayed another elite professional player on the same champion in the same moment that it was mind-numbing. You have to watch it on slow motion 20 times to actually understand just how thoroughly he owned this person. I mean, it's the equivalent of a basketball player in the NBA finals dribbling through someone's legs 5 times in a row and then dunking it on top of them, right? And so these moments are happening, the skill is being expressed, and these people absolutely are in the 0.0000001%, right? At the highest levels. It's just not quite as easy to tell as someone jumping really high or running really fast.
This episode of Yang Speaks is brought to you by BetterHelp. I am doing BetterHelp. I'm actually doing it once a week. It's like $90 a week, not even, for basically as many sessions as you want to schedule. And I talked to my person, let's call her Sarah. That's not her real name, but I won't share her real name. But I talk to Sarah all the time, once a week, and it's great. And we talk about a whole host of things, and you can do it too. So you can talk about depression, anxiety, stress, relationships, sleeping, trauma, family conflicts, anger, you name it. We kind of cover the gamut. So I really do encourage this, particularly in COVID, guys, like get this stuff out of your system. It is awesome. So here's our call to action for you. I want you to start living a happier life today. Do what I'm doing. And as a listener, you'll get 10% off your first month by visiting our sponsor, betterhelp.com/yang. So join over 1 million people, and me too, who have taken charge of their mental health. That's betterhelp, HELP.com/yang.
One thing that I find really interesting and find to be part of the compelling case that esports will be the future is a lot of traditional sports team owners have bought esports teams, right? So maybe like I would love to hear from you a little bit about that and just why you really see esports as being the future and moving into the mainstream, or what the case is for that.
Yeah, I've worked on like dozens of those deals, right? So I've been in the room with the sports team owner time and time again as they're expressing why it's interesting to them. And they're, depending on who you're talking about, there are a bunch of reasons why, cross promotion, engage younger audiences, whatever. But across the board, if there's one thing that I think is at least in the back of everyone's mind, it's that at some point someone paid $100 million for an NBA franchise and everyone thought that person was crazy. Fast forward to today and the worst NBA franchise is worth $1 billion. So there's a little bit of schmuck insurance here of like the writing is on the wall, this is going to be popular and like I have an opportunity to get on the ground floor. So why don't I just like plant a flag there and see where this goes, right? And where this is going, 100% that is inarguable, is full mainstream penetration. So you've both made the point that we're not there yet. We're not there yet in the US. We are there in certain places. So Korea, South Korea is kind of the mecca of esports. It's where a lot of this was born, and it's full cultural penetration in South Korea, right? I mean, you talked about football being like that, Zach, in the US, the quarterback of the football team in the small town in Texas is like guaranteed to be the most popular kid at the school. Well, like the best League of Legends player is like guaranteed to be the most popular kid at the Korean high school, right? And where are they going to hang out? They're going to hang out in PC bungs, which are basically cafe/bars where you can hang out, drink, have fun with your friends and play games. And it's just a huge part of Korean culture. And there are places, China's another one where the mainstream penetration is far ahead there than it is here. The most popular League of Legends player in China is sponsored by Nike already, right? There are places where that's already happened. Now, it has not happened for the most part in the US, and we are trending very much up, right? So Ninja's the most famous Western gamer on planet Earth. He's a former Halo professional player, former esports player or athlete, depending on what term you want to use, who became very popular along with the game Fortnite, and he's been on the cover of ESPN, the magazine, and he was part of a New Year's Eve Times Square thing, and he has his own line with Adidas, and he is insanely famous, right? I mean, he's a very well-known person, particularly among younger generations. Now, he straddles the gaming esports line, right? He's not an active esports professional player anymore. He's a former pro turned full-time content creator, right? But the ceiling of how famous a gamer can be is already pretty high, and it's just going to keep going up, right? I talked about us being in the bottom half of the second inning, this thing, pick an arbitrary age. Everyone 40 years old or younger grew up in a world where video games even existed, basically, right? So that means like well over half the world population grew up without them, and we convert these people all the time. There are people older than 40 who didn't grow up with games who start playing games later or become esports fans, but it's hard. But the thing is, in the long run, I don't need to convert them, right? I frequently make a joke that pisses people off, which is every day a baseball fan dies and 2 esports fans are born, right? Median age of a baseball fan is in the 50s, right? The overwhelming majority of my audience is under 35. So every day, more esports fans are born, and that's why I'm 100% convinced that in 30 years, when we're listing the biggest sports in the world, we're going to say soccer and we're going to say a video game, because we're already on this trajectory. The writing is on the wall. It was on the wall then. I said the exact same thing in a partner meeting at the third largest law firm in Seattle when I started my career, and I started building a practice that all the old white dudes at my firm were like, what the hell is going on? And I said, this is what's going on. Like, this is the data. It's going to happen. It's inevitable. And there were people there who supported me, but a lot of people who didn't, right? I went out and kind of forged my own entrepreneurial path for a reason. I said it in a talk in 2016, and I'll keep saying it, like, this is where this is all going. It's going up into the right. In 30 years, the most famous esports players in the US will be, famous in the same way that an NBA player is famous. This is just inevitable. The thesis that people want to watch other people play video games, open, shut, done.
I'm curious. I think video games, Andrew wrote about this in his book, is something a lot of men are attracted to. But I also have this vision of one of the first sports where men and women can compete against each other without the limitations of physical traits, and like on relatively equal ground. I guess the definition of equal ground is that. Are you guys seeing gender diversity and more women joining the sport, or I'm curious demographics and who's playing?
So by and large, we're not, and it's a huge problem. But to start with the premise, it's not correct to say that gamers are mostly or are like, predominantly men, right? Of the 3 billion gamers in the world, somewhere between 40 and 45% of them are women, depending on what market research study you're looking at. Now, that is all gaming, right? There are certain sections of the population that are deeply interested in certain types of gaming. Like if you want to know the player base of Candy Crush, it is overwhelmingly women, right? And there are millions of people that play Candy Crush, right? So the esports titles, the League of Legends and Counter-Strike of the world still are predominantly men. And there are the layers of this problem. We could do an hour on gender discrimination in gaming, and it's something I try to actively work on every chance I get. And so here's what it looks like, right? Like, why are there fewer female engineers than there are male engineers, right? It starts from a very young age when parents tell their, daughters and sons what they are and are not supposed to do. Son, don't play with this doll. Go play this sport. Girl, stop playing this video game, start doing this other thing instead, right? It's unbelievable how much these cultural norms affect us and affect what we're interested in from a very young age. And these things play out over the course of over your entire life. A girl that is super into video games in high school is going to be treated differently, right? There are cultural norms that tell her she's a nerd, she's an outcast, right? She's an outlier, she's not doing what she's supposed to be doing. And it's a real problem. And then you get into the games themselves and the harassment is unbelievable. I mean, any game where there are voice communications, if you have friends who are women who play games, ask them what their experience is like, and they will have one of two answers. I don't use voice communications in the game because I just can't. I don't want to be harassed. I'm over it. Or two, I do it and I'm constantly have my teammates harassing me, saying horrible things to me, intentionally losing games because because they're on the same team as a girl. It is horrible. And then they face harassment. You do get through all of this stuff to be a professional female gamer in some capacity in a game or a content creator or whatever, and you are harassed constantly on your social media handles, on your Twitch stream. The parties in power are not doing enough job to correct this, but if we're being honest about it, this is a problem that goes so deep. There are so many layers to why these things happen, and it's, there are a lot of very good things that are happening, girls who code, right, in projects like this who are trying to push the bounds of getting more gender diversity in professions where there is no reason why they are dominated by men, but or no one reason why, but there are, all these layers of the problem, and it very much exists in my industry as well. I hate it. I try to do what I can about it, but yeah, Zach, the premise is correct. There is no reason why a man should be better at League of Legends than a woman, or a man should be better at Counter-Strike than a woman. But when you look at the professional player base of these games, they are almost exclusively men. Some of them are 100% men. There are no women playing in the North American League of Legends Championship Series in North, and that's a problem.
New and innovative technologies, the cutting edge. Sadly, a lot of times when that is when they in the nascent stages, when they're being built and the process is being built, and that sort of thing, when it's predominantly men, the issues you're highlighting aren't addressed early on. And so then you have this entire system to fight against to even rewire it once it gets a little more popular.
I was a computer science minor in college, and I I was sort of aware of this problem then because I had professors who were into gaming or into gaming platforms and would talk about the harassment. And I know in conferences, it's always been really bad at gaming conferences, and doxing is a phenomenon that's very prominent in the gaming community, and especially towards women. So this was, probably 7 years ago or whatever, that this was sort of at the forefront of things I was thinking about and knew about. But I haven't kept up with it. Like, are you seeing improvements at least, as much as it still has a long way to go?
At the margins, we are seeing improvement. I mean, I don't want to say that we've seen no improvement, because we have. There's some thoughtfulness around this. I mean, Riot Games, for example, it's not just at the professional player base, it's throughout the gaming industry, right? If you want to work in gaming and you're a woman, the amount of adversity that you are facing is significantly higher than for your male peers. Anyone who denies that is an idiot. And there were, for example, there were active lawsuits against Riot Games, and there was a ton discussed about the culture of Riot Games. And there were some things about acute discrimination, but there were also things where, like, they had a bar as part of their admission process where it's like, you have to be a hardcore gamer, otherwise we're not really interested in hiring you. And if you do that, if you set a hardcore gamer bar, which on its face seems like a neutral criteria, we are a hardcore gaming company, we want hardcore gamers working here, you are neglecting the reality that a man is far more likely to be a hardcore gamer because of all of the other things I talked about leading up to the moment in time where this person applied to work at Riot Games. And so, Riot culture has changed meaningfully. It's not perfect. There was a lawsuit filed recently against the CEO for gender discrimination. So, which is, it's an allegation. I'm not saying it's true or false, right? I have no idea, but it's not. We're far from perfect on that stuff, but there have been some improvements. I'm always hesitant to give us too much of a pat on the back for this, because the problem is still so bad. And I literally cannot have a conversation with my female friends who work in the industry without hearing more and more stories about what it is like to just be them, and the challenges that they face on a daily basis, the discrimination in a business meeting. I'm on the board of an amazing company that has 2 female founders. And if I attend a meeting with them, they are the founders. It is their company. I am just there, right? And we're across from a man in a meeting. 1 out of 2 times, they'll have a conversation with me. Like, I'm like, you're asking about their company. Talk to them, right? Like, why is this I'm here to support. I can add some context, value, whatever. But, like, this is a conversation between you and these 2 amazing women, and I'm along for this ride. And it is, as much as we've come a long way over the course of the last 5 years, Carly, we still have so much more to go.
That's really frustrating and makes some sense.
This is sadly not an exclusive problem to the esports or the gaming industry, and that, frankly, we could have a whole podcast on this. It's one of the reasons why Andrew and myself and Carly have worked in politics to try and solve some of these on a society-wide scale. As we wrap this, I want to talk about what this looks like in the future. My vision was always like some sort of blend of the physical and the digital. Where do you think this is going?
We're still a ways away from having the, like, football played by human beings without the physical contact, where, like, your size, strength, speed is expressed through this virtual reality world, and you can have some of the upside of, like, football and traditional sports in general. You express that without the downside of, literally killing the participants, right? So, maybe someday the technology gets there. I'm not a VR expert, so I can't say. It's certainly something that people are going to be pushing on, and, people will try. And whether or not VR ever becomes, the technology gets good enough and it gets cheap enough to the point where you have widespread adoption, which is critical, right? Because if you don't have it, then you can't get to that level, right? Why is soccer the most popular sport in the world? It's not just because it was played everywhere. You have to ask why it was played everywhere. And the answer is, it's the lowest barrier to entry sport. You literally just need a very cheap ball, and you don't even need a goal or a field. People play it on street, and play all. You throw down. Any kids knows this. You throw two jackets on the ground, and it's a goal, right? It's like so easy. So, will VR ever get to that point? Maybe, right? Only time is going to tell on that one. And if it does, then maybe the most popular sport in the world will be virtual reality or something, AR or something, right? Part of where this is going is mobile for sure, right? Mobile games are the fastest growing sector of gaming as a whole. And it is exploding in growth and popularity. It's a complicated meshing of principles though, because compelling mobile games are simple enough to work on a small device, and they have a short enough session time that it's, like, naturally suited to the platform. And the best esports and sports in the world tend to be more complicated and tend to involve longer session time. There are some popular mobile esports, absolutely. PUBG is a very popular mobile esport, for example. Clash Royale, very popular mobile esport, but they're not on the same scale as Counter-Strike or League of Legends. Someday that will get solved. Someday someone is going to come up with the right cross-section of those two things. And, I could easily see a world in which the most popular esport is mobile, but we're not there yet.
I think I've missed the boat a little bit on this. I don't think I'll ever become a gamer particularly, but I totally buy the premise that this is the future and like this is where things are going. So if from like a business perspective, I'm like, this is interesting. I want to learn more about it. Like,
Carly
where do I go?
Carly,
what do I invest in?
What am I
Bryce?
buying?
Yeah.
What's
What
going
do
to the
I
moon?
invest in?
Yeah,
Carly stonks Riley. Show it. Tell us what's up.
From an investment perspective, it's tough. Most of it's private, and the public exposure is probably oversold. And like, in practice, there are like esports ETFs and things like that. And some of the people behind them are great human beings. And, I think that the goal there is really good. But if we're being honest about how much esports exposure there is in the stocks in the portfolio, it's like really small, right? Like, the esports exposure, even when you're getting the biggest esports companies, Blizzard, Activision, right, which makes Overwatch and Call of Duty, and Riot Games is owned by Tencent, and Tencent is publicly traded on the Chinese stock exchange. And so you can, get Tencent stock and,
doesn't Amazon own Twitch? You buy Amazon.
Yeah, Amazon. Right? Yeah, exactly. But like, what percentage of Twitch is a giant company, but like, what percentage of Twitch exposure are you getting when you buy Amazon stock? Right. It's the same thing as like, what percentage of esports exposure are you getting when you buy Tencent stock? Well, they own a stake in Supercell. Supercell has some esports. They own a stake in Riot. Riot has esports, but like, it's mostly a games related investment, not an esports investment. So there are. This trend is changing. There have been some esports companies that have gone public on the Canadian Stock Exchange. I think 1 or 2 in the US. There are lots of conversations around SPACs and IPOs for esports companies. So there will be more opportunity in the public markets, but right now, most of your investment opportunity on esports is private. For all of the reasons that I've talked about on this podcast, esports was a very sexy investment topic and still is to this day. And so you have a lot of people who deployed capital into a lot of ventures of questionable success likelihood, I guess is a very generous way of putting it. It's kind of like betting on the internet, right? In the 90s.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah. For every like Google, there's 100 pets.coms, right? Where it's like, I'm to the moon with this internet thing that you're hearing about. And it's like, probably not
Andrew Star, CharityStar.com.
Really great idea. Yeah, Andrew Yang.
Actually,
started
was a solid idea.
He started Omaze before Omaze, but
Omaze before Omaze. So actually, his idea was actually good. It just got in the .com bubble. But that doesn't stop my plan here. I think Yang Speaks should explore very seriously buying an esports team or something fun. I'm dead serious about this. So if you're listening to this and you're like, yes, and I have capital, DM me. This will be amazing. Bryce will call you to handle all litigation and strategy. Don't know what we're doing. What are you excited about 10 years from now in this space?
10 years from now will be the period in time where the esports industry is going to start to actually look like whatever it's going to be when it grows up. So, as with all things where you have an enormous amount of investment that pours in, and I alluded to this earlier, I think many of those things are going to fail. There's conversation around the esports bubble. The analogy is fair in the sense that there are esports companies out there that are overvalued. There are companies that have raised millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars that are going to fail and fail big time. And that will cause some regression in the market, right? Some people who were thinking, oh my God, this is so sexy, are going to have a conversation with someone who lost $10 million on their esports investment and they're going to shy away. But that's okay with me because quite frankly, there's too much of some of this stuff, like too many players in the field because it was like everyone wanted to be in the esports space for a time. And so for me, 10 years from now will be when we have sorted all of that out a little bit. The dust will have settled in the kind of the post shake-up and valuation normalization, and we'll be building the real esports infrastructure of the future. And I'm excited because I've speculated about what that's going to look like, but I'm not positive, right? Like, for example, one of the big aspects of the esports ecosystem we haven't talked about is the publisher, right? Like, these are sports that are owned. No one has to pay the Naismith family a royalty to run and broadcast a basketball tournament. As we've seen, you can just run one. ESPN during the NBA offseason runs the basketball tournament. Now, what protects the NBA's market share is that they have all the best players signed to exclusive contracts. And if you want to watch the best basketball, that's where it's going to be. And it's really hard to imagine someone disrupting it. You can try, if you want to be Vince McMahon, you can create the XFL and try to, run up against the NFL. You can't do that in esports, right? The publisher owns the sport and can stop you from broadcasting it. And what that has led to is a series of decisions that have caused the biggest publishers to control much, if not in the entirety of their esports ecosystem. I'm not convinced that's what this is going to look like long term. It could. It definitely could. Riot Games has, for example, developed, as has Blizzard or Activision, developed an enormous amount of internal capabilities around operating a sports league. But at the end of the day, their core business is in making games and making those games good and creating compelling monetization loops for them, not running a sports business. And so it would not shock me if in the long run, the majority of esports were actually run by third parties like the NBA. Hey, we have 30 indoor venues all over the country. We have deep connectivity to everything you would need, from media to sponsorships to monetize the heck out of this thing. License it to us. We'll pay you a flat fee. We'll give you some revenue upside, and let us be your sports league arm. I'm of the belief there's a meaningful chance that will be where this goes, but time is going to tell, depending on how the bubble bursts and what are the implications of that. So I'm excited to be 10 years down the road and see what we're actually building that will be the infrastructure for the next 100 years.
That is exciting. And a lot of these leagues exist, and a lot of people know a lot more about this than me, but the reason the NFL, the NBA exists, a lot of it's liability and also profitability, right? It's like protection. It's easier to blame Roger Goodell than XYZ video game company, right? And Goodell's protected by all the owners, and go down the list, right? I'm grateful for your time, Bryce. This was fascinating. Where this goes will be mind-blowing. I've always had this theory that as soon as an insurance company sponsors it, then it's officially mainstream. So when Geico is calling to sponsor the leagues, then we'll know. And so hopefully 10 years we'll come back and see if Geico's involved.
Well, Zach, I hate to interrupt you, but I got to do it. I've done a Geico sponsorship deal for an esports
No
team.
way.
So I guess we're there.
I'm out. I'm done. Thank you, sir.
Thanks so much for teaching us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Keep kicking butt. We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you both so much.